Welcome to the Mike Litton Experience Podcast. Mike has over 31 years experience in real estate, finance, and investing. He's passionate about being a father, a teacher, a realtor, an investor, and a leader. Everyone has a story, and our passion is to help them tell it. And now, introducing the host of the Mike Litton Experience, Mike Litton.
So what can you expect from the Mike Litton Experience? You can expect stories that will inspire, motivate, advice that will sharpen your focus, and expert information on real estate, finance, and market conditions. Ann Montgomery, thank you so much for being our guest on the Mike Litton Experience. I am so excited about our time together. I barely slept last night because I knew this interview was coming. I am so honored to have you on with us, and I'm so excited to have you tell us your life story. Like we talked about before we hit record, everybody has a story, and our passion is to help them tell it. So with your permission, we're going to start with where you were born, go all the way up to today, and then we can talk about anything that you're working on today, and then we absolutely want to talk about the book that you're working on for June, okay?
Okay. Thank
Sounds
you for
great.
having me.
I'm so excited to have you here. So tell us where you were born.
I was born in Grand Rapids, Michigan, but my parents moved shortly thereafter. So I was raised in New Jersey. I
Okay.
consider myself a Jersey girl, but I've been in Arizona 30 years and I wear cowboy boots. So maybe I'm also an Arizonan. I don't know. But I was raised right outside of New York City. I could
So-
walk the end of my street, hop on a bus, be in Manhattan in 40 minutes.
Wow. So,
Yeah, in
so
fact,
the Garden State, huh?
Yeah, when I went to college, I went to Miami of Ohio. And when the kids there said, "Oh, let's go into the city," I went, "Great." And they took me to Cincinnati. And I went, "Where's the city? This is not a city." I hope I'm not offending people from Cincinnati, but to me, a city was New York. So
Oh my gosh. So the chili capital of the world wasn't New York, huh?
no, I kept around for like skyscrapers. I'm like, where am I? So yeah, I'm a Jersey girl. I
I
am.
got you. I got you. There's just no place in the world like Manhattan.
There's not. 3 days of it, I'm over it, but
Yeah.
I do miss that sometimes. I miss the theater, I miss the museums, I miss the restaurants, I miss all that. So,
So I think I know the answer to this question, but let me ask you anyway. What was your favorite thing about growing up in the Garden State?
the variety of things that I got to do, I really get upset when people say New Jersey is nothing but concrete because I learned to ski in New Jersey. We had the beach, we had we had mountains, we had forests. I grew up in streams and the woods around my area. I did not grow up in an urban setting. I mean, New Jersey is quite beautiful.
It
So I
really
spent
is.
quite a bit of my life defending it. Also, again, New York City. I mean, I realize it's not New Jersey, but you hop into the Museum of Natural History or the Museum of Modern Art or see a Broadway show. I thought all kids could do that. Clearly, I was wrong.
Yeah. But what a way to grow up, huh?
It was great. And I will defend New Jersey forever.
There you go. I'll defend it with you. I haven't even lived there, and I'll defend it with you. So let me ask you this: who was the most influential person to you growing up?
Wow, that's hard. I was a loner. I was obese, and I came from a family of very smart people. My mother had a college degree and was a reporter in the 1940s.
Oh,
Watched my dad get a master's degree when I was 8. They read 2 newspapers every day, and my brother and sister were smart, but I didn't find out till I was in my 50s that I'm dyslexic.
oh my gosh.
Back then, they didn't have a name for this. Nobody said,
Right,
"Oh, maybe she has a reading problem."
right.
So, they just said I was and lazy,
Mhm.
and so I spent a great deal of time alone,
Yeah,
and the best thing about that was I had a big collie.
yeah.
And she I don't know how to explain that, but she was with me all the time. She even came to school. And where I'd go to school and kids would make fun of me. My hair was really short. Kids would say, "Are you a boy or a girl?" That kind of thing. And my dog would come to school by herself. And
Hmm.
the teachers knew her and they'd let her in the school.
Wow.
And she would come in and find me and lie down next to me. And that made me very popular.
Yeah.
In fact, 3 little girls came up to me one day after school. I'm bouncing a ball against the wall, and they said, "We've decided you can't bring that dog to school anymore because when that dog is here, all the boys pay attention to you."
Yeah.
So don't bring that dog anymore. And my brain's going, I'm bringing my dog every day.
Absolutely. That just qualified him.
Yeah. Yeah. So honestly, at that point, it was my dog.
Yeah. We
You
just
know,
punched his ticket.
she was the best, Betsy. And I had some friends, but I was awkward and not, I wasn't smart. And so I always felt like I didn't really belong anywhere. So maybe a silly answer to your question,
No, it's
but
not.
my dog, and I had a cat too,
Yeah.
but they helped me. And
Yeah.
honestly, today I love wilderness. I love woods. I love brooks. I love lakes. I'm a scuba diver. I like nature. And so I spent a lot of time by myself in the woods, which was beautiful.
Yeah.
So I don't know, I would have been a different kid if I grew up somewhere else, but
Your
I'm gonna
dog's name was Betsy?
Betsy, yeah.
See, that's why we asked that question. That was the perfect answer, by the way.
Oh,
That's why we
okay.
asked that question, because we want insight into how you grew up, and you just gave us the total insight
Yeah,
into how you grew up and who the most important, most influential person was, or
preacher.
or being. Yeah, right.
Yeah.
Right. I love that.
I don't know how I
So,
would have been without her.
so another question for you. In high school, what was your favorite subject?
Again, I was terrible at a lot of things. I was bad at languages. Apparently, dyslexic people are bad at languages, bad at math, bad at science. But I was very lucky to have grown up at a time when people cared about the arts in our schools.
Yeah.
And I was in theater, I was in music, speech. Those are the only reason I even made the top half of my class
Yeah.
because I loved those. Also, I was very fortunate that we had something called the broadcast crew.
Mhm.
And the broadcast crew was a group of students who every morning, there was a half hour of homeroom, we did a radio show.
Mhm.
And it was funny because there were only two girls on the crew. And I went one day, one of the hockey players handed me an announcement to read
Mhm.
because he knew I was one of the broadcast crew people. And I went in and I decided I'll do all the sports today. And I pulled all the sports announcements out of a basket. And a couple minutes before the show starts, the guys started yelling at me. They said, "You can't read sports stories. You're a girl." And I said, "Well, why can't I?" So we're fighting. And the
Right.
teacher comes in and goes, "If Annie wants to read the sports, let her read the sports. We have a show to do, do it." Right.
Right.
So from that day on, I kept stealing all the sports stories. And
Beautiful.
people around school realized it was me because we didn't use our last names,
Right.
but they would bring me sports stories.
Awesome.
And the guys got mad about it, but the teacher
Sure.
let me do it. And so they started calling me Big Ann. Here's Big Ann with the sports. And they had a theme song now. They gave me a theme song and it was Mission Impossible. Dun, 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 dun,
Yeah.
because how silly a woman doing sports, right?
Right.
But what they didn't, they did it to offend me, but I really liked it.
Yeah.
And so I became the sportscaster. And in my high school yearbook, it says, "This is your local sportscaster," under my photograph.
Yeah.
Let us remember, though, this was 1972.
Right.
And there weren't women sportscasters. There were a handful, but it was like Phyllis George. And I'm not dissing Phyllis George, but they would let her stand in her fur coat on the sidelines and interview a coach's wife.
Yeah.
That wasn't sportscasting to me.
Right.
And Peggy Fleming would comment on Olympic skating. But
Yeah.
in general, you didn't see women do this.
True.
So when my mother came up to me with her cat-eye glasses and her spike heels, and she said, "So it's time to pick a college. What do you want to be when you grow up?" I
Mhm.
said, "I want to be a sportscaster." And
Right.
she said, "Don't be ridiculous. I'm trying to have a serious conversation with you."
Right. Stop joking around. Yeah.
Yeah. I'm like, "But that's what I wanna do." And everywhere I went, I ran into the same problem. When I went to college, the professor said, "It will never happen. You will never be a sports reporter. You're a girl."
Mhm.
Got out of college with a degree in communications, which, as you know, probably gets you nothing in
Yeah.
the real world. And I couldn't nobody would even take an application from me.
Wow.
So I would spend I went to Washington, DC, where I lived with I had a crazy aunt,
Mhm.
and, I couldn't even get an app. I walked into places, "Can I apply?" "No, go away." And I ended up working in a bar in Georgetown, which
Wow.
was great fun.
Yeah.
It was like being in a candy store all the time. And for a couple years, I gave up. I basically said, "How am I gonna be a sportscaster?" And a weird thing happened. You know how there are those moments in your life where one little incident happens and it changes everything?
It's why we
I
do this podcast.
Yeah, well, I've had a couple
Exactly
of
why we do it.
and I went with my aunt to a Washington Capitals game,
Mhm.
And I grew up as an ice skater, by the way. I was an ice dancer when I was younger. I grew out of being obese, by the way, by the time I was in high school. But I was an ice skater. So in my heart, I had visions of gold medals, but I was incredibly mediocre and way too big to be an ice dancer. So I grew up wanting sports glory and
Mhm.
understanding why people wanted it. So I did have the sports background, and I skied and I swam and did some other things.
Mhm.
But I'm in Washington, DC. I go to this hockey game, and my aunt had a friend with her, and he turns out he was an amateur ice hockey official, like for little kids, you know?
Yeah,
And he was bemoaning the fact that there weren't enough hockey officials. And let's face it, there aren't enough officials even today in most amateur sports.
true.
So he said, "We really need officials." And my aunt said, "Oh, Annie skates. Why don't you go be a referee?" And
There's
I
an
said,
idea.
"Yeah, all right, right." So I applied, and it, though I spent my life in a rink, it never occurred to me that figure skates and hockey skates were very different. Do you know
Right.
the difference? What's the difference? I found out in a very difficult way.
Yeah.
Yes, I went out on the ice. First time I ever wore my hockey skates. I'm doing 5-year-old kids, you know, the ones with their jerseys at their knees
Right.
and their little sawed-off sticks, and their hats are crooked because their
Mhm.
heads aren't big enough.
Yeah.
And I went out to take that face off, and I fell.
Yeah.
And then I couldn't get up because
Yep.
I'm used to sticking my toe picks
Yep.
in ice, and hockey skates have no toe picks.
Right.
So I fell 2 more times trying to get up, and these I'll never forget the faces of these little kids staring down at me on the ice.
This is
Like,
our ref.
oh my god, it was awful. But here's the thing, I don't remember anything else about the rest of that game, but I
Right.
remember the drive home. And I realized that because I came before Title IX,
Mhm.
I didn't know enough about sports. I knew hockey because I grew up in an arena.
Mhm.
But I didn't know the intricacies of the 5 main team spectator sports: football, baseball, ice hockey, soccer, basketball. I didn't because I never played them.
Right.
So I decided then and there in that drive home that I was going to become a certified amateur official in those 5 sports,
Awesome.
and that I would do that for 5 years. And that eventually some forward thinking news director would go, "Wow, she knows a lot about sports." Because why? She had to read rule books and take tests and do scrimmages and will look at video to be an official.
Right.
And eventually that is exactly what happened.
You're kidding me.
Nope. I was 28. My parents had an intervention where they came to Washington and begged me to go back to college because I
Ah!
was such an embarrassment to the
Oh
family.
my gosh.
And
You
I said,
can't make this stuff
no,
up.
I'm not. And my mother's I said, "No, mom." I said, "I'm gonna be a sportscaster." She said, "No, you're not. You're nothing but a waitress. And
Right.
what am I gonna tell my friends?" Because the restaurant's scheduled around all my games.
Yeah.
And, I did it, and I don't think you're old enough maybe to remember Broadcasting Magazine. There
Yeah.
was a there was a magazine came out
Right. Yep.
weekly, and in the back, there were want ads.
Yep.
And you
Help
didn't
wanted.
know where
Yeah.
they were going. It was just a blind box number. And
Yep.
it said, "Sportscaster wanted, send your stuff."
Mhm.
Now, another strange thing happened, and maybe if this hadn't happened, I wouldn't have never been in TV.
Mhm.
At the restaurant, it was a restaurant where all kinds of rich and famous people hung out,
Yeah.
athletes and musicians, and Sylvester Stallone came through, and Maria Shriver shucked oysters there, and Arnold Schwarzenegger would come in, and so it was that kind of place.
Yeah.
And one day there were 2 people from NBC, a husband and wife team, and they were producing a show called Long Shots.
Mhm.
And they were looking for 4 people to do 15-minute segments on, or 12-minute segments, about people who were one thing but wanted to be something else.
Right.
There was a truck driver who wanted to be a country western singer. There was a woman who wanted to be a boxer, and back
Yeah.
then women didn't box. So, they asked me one day, 'cause I waited on them all the time. They said, "Hey, you wanna be in our show?" They said, "You're here, you are a waitress, you wanna be a sportscaster?" I said, "Great." So they did a 12-minute piece on me.
Wow.
Where they followed me to my game. They went to a baseball game and a hockey game. They
It's
set
like
up
a resume,
yes,
but
and
video
they
on
put
television on
yes,
NBC of all places.
and then and it won some awards, that
Yeah.
show. The
Oh my
thing is they took me to the NBC studios there, and they had me do a broadcast with a former, Washington player, a football player, and, they followed me doing a bunch of things, and, I had that video.
wow.
And so when I applied to that box number, which turned out to be in Columbus, Georgia,
Oh yay.
oh my gosh. And they said, "Be here in 2 weeks."
Right.
It's like, "Oh my gosh, I have a job." What I had neglected to consider was the fact that I didn't know how to be on TV.
Yeah.
I knew how to referee a football game, call a baseball game. I knew
Yeah.
how to do those things, and I'm a real good at making drinks. I'm a
Mhm.
good bartender, but I knew nothing about being on TV really. And so I got to Columbus, Georgia on a Sunday night. My boss said, "Okay, you're gonna be our sports director. You're gonna anchor the 6 and 11 o'clock sports, and you're going on Wednesday."
Yeah.
And it was a nightmare.
Yeah.
It was so bad because no one I mean, I was very fortunate that the man I was working with, the other sports guy, was very nice and very helpful.
Yeah.
But do you remember how before teleprompters were digital, there were like 6 sheets of paper in carbon copy, which young
Yeah.
people don't use.
Yeah.
And so
Press
you
hard.
type out,
Press
yeah,
hard. Yeah.
right. And when you typed on it, there were 6 copies, and one was to go to the producer, one to the director, one to the other anchors, the teleprompter, whatever. So no one told me how that worked, and there was a real thin line down the middle of that page. I didn't know what it meant, so I
Mhm.
just typed my scripts from one end to the other,
Mhm.
not knowing that only the right column would show up on the teleprompter.
Right.
So there I am. They go, "Oh, so nice to have the first woman sportscaster
Good
in
half of it.
Georgia."
Yeah.
And I turned to the teleprompter, no scripts.
Yeah.
And I didn't know I was supposed to have a copy in my hand.
Right.
And it was the longest 3 minutes of my life. It was like being in a car accident because I don't remember a lot of it.
Right.
But it turns out my mother's best friend was in Atlanta in a
Mhm.
hotel, and she turned on the TV, and there I was.
Of course you do.
He called my mother and said, "She's terrible. I
Yep.
just saw her on TV. She's awful."
Time for another intervention.
Yeah, and my mother would not see me on TV for 2, 3 years. She
Yeah.
refused. Yeah,
Unbelievable.
but,
Unbelievable.
you learn. You
Yeah.
look in front of everyone.
Yeah. And you'll never make that mistake again, right? You'll always come
No,
over on the
no,
right side.
and I worked for 5 TV stations over the years, so I straightened it out
Yeah.
eventually. Frankly, I'm surprised they didn't fire me that night.
Well, baptism by fire. That's so cool. I love that story. My goodness. Okay. So you're a sportscaster for 5 years, right? Your dream come true.
10.
Right.
I worked
10.
for 5 TV stations.
I got you. Okay. So 5 TV stations for 10 years.
Yeah.
Okay. What was your favorite thing about those 10 years in sportscasting?
My favorite thing, I was never bored.
Yeah.
Every day was different. And some days were great, and some days were a nightmare.
Yeah.
When you're live on TV or radio, stuff happens.
Yeah.
I plan something
Yeah.
and I'm live on the set and they go, "Quick, dump a minute from your show," and you're speaking and they're
Right.
telling you. So that was difficult, but it was also kind of exhilarating.
Yeah.
Um, I like that I met so many different people. I like that I got to travel. Every 2 years you leave. Being in TV or radio is kind of like being in minor league baseball.
Mhm.
You start in A ball, then you move up to double A, get a little more money,
Mhm.
triple A, and then the majors. And but the only thing is, and when I was a teacher, I explained this to kids. I said, "Don't get attached to people, don't get pregnant, don't get married, don't pick someone who's a police officer or a professor with tenure because you're gonna have to leave. And you're gonna have to leave quickly." Very often I would get a call from my agent who would say, "Okay, they're hiring you in Phoenix. Okay, bye, 2 weeks, gotta be there."
Yeah.
So that's difficult, but still it's exciting. So
Yeah.
I
You never
it's
really
always
settle.
exciting.
You never
Yeah,
really settle because you
yeah,
got to be ready to go at a moment's notice, right?
yeah, and the higher up you go, the more you make,
Mhm.
the more exciting, you get Major League Sports to cover. So I really enjoyed it, but I will say that if I don't think I could still do it today.
Yeah.
I think it would get old
Well,
after
it's
a
a different world today than it was then.
Yeah. Yeah, but still it was, actually too that people on TV deal with social media stuff. I mean, I got slammed in the newspapers if I misspoke, but it wasn't constant. It wasn't like Twitter and
Right.
Instagram. All that.
24 hours a day, 7 days a week.
Yeah, so I mean, I could go home and even though they wrote me up in the because I was a freak. I mean, there really were almost no women sportscasters.
Yeah.
So, I was constantly being watched, and if I misspoke, they made a big deal out of it.
Yeah.
And I
But
had
you
to
were a
just
trailblazer, and
well
you probably blazed a trail for a lot of women that are now
I
in
don't
sportscasting.
I find that young people today, and I've taught in high school and college, that they don't seem to understand what it was like.
Yeah.
They seem to think, "Oh, there's all kinds of jobs for women in sports." I'm like, "Not really."
Yeah.
There really aren't. There are just so many more outlets. I mean, in my time, there were 3 network stations in a city and 1 independent one. And there
Right.
were maybe 2 or 3 sportscasters at those stations. That's all there were.
Yeah, it was
Less
ABC,
than 10
NBC,
jobs.
and CBS, right?
Yes, and
Yeah.
usually some local, small station.
No
But so in one
ESPN, no
city,
Fox. Yeah.
if you were lucky, there'd be 10 to 12 jobs.
Right.
Today, there's tons of jobs with all the outlets that are doing it. But, have women, progressed? I don't think so, because the big job they give them is the dumbest job in sportscasting, the sideline reporter.
Yeah.
It shouldn't even exist. Who wants to put a microphone in some coach's face and say, "How do you feel, coach? You're losing 52-6."
Right.
No one wants to do that. And on top of that, they almost only talk about medical things. I
Yeah.
think he tore his
Achilles.
yeah,
Yeah.
or he's got a knee injury. Let's put nurses on the sidelines with
Right.
microphones. That would make much more sense
Yeah.
because they rarely talk about football or
I agree with
whatever.
that.
So that bothers me because why we can't put women in the booth to do play-by-play in color? It's not brain surgery, but we still don't do that.
Yeah.
Do you remember when Andrea Kramer and I can't think of her name, Gail Gardner maybe? I don't know if it was Gail, but they did an NFL game like in 2015. They said, "Oh, we're going to have a women's team in the booth." I
Mhm.
went, "Yay!" It was a Monday night football game. Turns out when you turned on the game, it was Tony Romo and my brain, I can't think who.
Jim
Aikman.
Nance.
No, it was Aikman actually. And they were on there and they said, "Oh, if you want to hear the women, you have to go to this other station."
The
And
other channel. Yeah. So
women-
Romo and Nance work together.
yep. Oh,
Aikman,
okay.
Aikman and Buck work together.
Buck, that's who it was. I'm
Right.
sorry.
So
Aikman
Buck
and
is
Buck.
play-by-play, Aikman's color.
Right, right.
Romo's color, Nance is play-by-play.
See what happens when you get old.
Oh, it's
Um,
fine. You're
but
fine. No problem.
anyway, the point
That
was,
happens to be my bailiwick, by the way. I'm a huge monster football fan. So so that kind of stuff I can help you with.
well, do you remember when they did this? Do you
All the
remember
rest
when
of
they
that stuff
had the
I
women?
wasn't.
And the women weren't even at the game. They
Yeah.
were like hundreds of miles away, and almost no one tuned in. I mean, it was ridiculous. And do you know that in the Pro Football Hall of Fame, they have a women's section now, women in football, and they have the headphones of those women who called the first NFL game called by women. Their headphones are there. Do you realize how ridiculous that is?
I have no idea that even happened.
Oh yeah. What, their broadcast?
No, I knew the broadcast. I remember the broadcast. And I remember we tuned in and it was Aikman and Buck,
Right.
right? And you had to go to a sister station or
Yes.
sister channel, pardon me. You had to go to sister channel in order to listen to the women do their
But the
their
NFL has
commentary.
pumped that up like it's such a big deal. And have any woman, I mean, maybe 1 or 2, but I don't think on an NFL broadcast women have done it yet.
I
So
don't know that there's been any NFL. There have been college. So there are
yes,
college play-by-play women doing play-by-play
I
announcing.
think 2 maybe.
Yeah, there's only a couple, but there have been. I don't think I remember any NFL games being
No, and
done
they
that.
act like it's the same with officiating.
Well, it's also like the Rooney Rule, right? Where if they're going to hire a coach, they have to go out and they have to interview a couple of minorities,
right.
right, in order to hire a coach.
And women count as minority.
Regardless of what the race of that coach is. I mean,
Right.
come on, you know.
Well, it's the same thing that the Arizona Cardinals did. They had a woman who came in and was an assistant coach for them.
Yep.
And but guess what? She really wasn't. She was
No.
an intern who worked preseason, and when the real season came around, she wasn't hired.
Yeah.
And guess what? Her Cardinals jacket is in the Pro Football Hall of Fame.
Of course it
Oakley.
is.
And
Of course it is.
just to add the last one, my friend Shannon was the first woman to call an NFL game. She was a wing. She was like a side judge, and it was during a strike, an
Mhm.
official strike. And guess what? Her hat and her whistle are in the Pro Football Hall of Fame, but they never gave her a job.
Unbelievable.
So you see how but see, the NFL is not because they understand that most of the people buying their products, their jerseys and hats are women.
Yeah.
And that's why they're pushing this. Aren't we great? Let's do flag football.
We hope you enjoyed another episode of the Mike Litton Experience. If you did, do us a favor, smash that subscribe button, tell your friends, family, and coworkers about our program, and wherever you get your podcasts, please leave us a rating. It helps us to connect with quality people just like you.
And that's a wrap. Another episode of the Mike Litton Experience in the books. Reach out to Mike on Instagram at Litton Realty. Want to meet with Mike? Check out calendly.com/Rio760.